Hey guys, welcome back to another video. It's been a long time since I posted one of these. I recently had a comment on my Instagram saying, where have you been? It's been 8 months, what's going on? And I thought to myself, God, it has been that long. And this is something I enjoy, so I thought, you know what? Here's a video I can do. I shot some B-roll for it a couple of weeks ago. You probably read the title of the video, and yeah, today talking about aerial photography. It's not going to be a very long video. Obviously, I'm going to break it down as I usually do. I'll start by talking about some sort of best practices for aerial photography. It's not something that I claim to be an expert on. I've done it maybe 3 or 4 times. My brother's actually looking to get his pilot license, or rather he's got his pilot's license. He's looking to upgrade it, get instrument hours. I went along, I took a camera with me, and I maybe went on 4 flights, maybe 3 with a camera and just 1 as a passenger. And here's the sort of the story, the vlog of how that went. So I will start by talking about sort of best practices. I'll talk a bit about the kit I used, and I'll end, obviously, we'll go through some pictures. It is a really nice way to reinvigorate. Obviously, I've been a little bit unmotivated landscape-wise during lockdown. I know people haven't been able to travel. It's been a little bit sort of isolated. So being able to go up into a light aircraft, see the countryside from above, see some of the coastline of Cornwall from the air, it's been a really good time. And yeah, let's jump into it. Obviously, the very fact that you're in a light aircraft, a very small kind of cockpit, means that you're not going to be able to take sort of all the kit in the world. So it's a good idea to kind of preset and select your kit and get as much as you can done on the ground, so that once you're in the air, if you're only up for an hour, you don't want to spend that time fumbling around, changing lenses and whatnot. I found that preloading all of my film backs and having each of the lenses set to the shutter and aperture combinations. I should mention, and yeah, I've missed this part of being a YouTuber, grabbing things off camera. But I've been using this Hasselblad 500 series. I've actually got it configured like this because I found that was the easiest way to use it whilst in a plane. You can see with the prism hood and the 120mm lens, this is quite a small package, but obviously I do get the big 6x6 nice square negative out of it. People say that you shouldn't use infinity on your lens. I've heard, I'm not sure who, but grumpy people in Facebook photography groups say that if you shoot your infinity stop on your lens, then you might as well shoot a box brownie. You're using less of the lens than you could, and you're kind of ditching your foreground for no real good reason. But aerial photography is actually an example of where locking everything to infinity is not a bad idea in the slightest. If you have one of those lenses that's a little bit older and slides infinity-wise when you point it down, I know that some zooms sort of creep out a bit. It might be a good idea to tape them off at infinity or at the focal length you want to use. But for these Hasselblad lenses, the VMAT lenses, because I have my infinity and my shutter and aperture on the lens, what I do is I preset them. So I'll take, for example, my fastest shutter speed, f11, because that gives me the correct exposure, given off my sort of metered prism. But yeah, preset as much as you can, preload as much as you can, and you're not going to be sat there flying over the best landscape and missing your shots because you're changing film or sort of having to focus or whatever. If you are using a medium format bit of kit like this 500 Hasselblad, you do want to get one of the prisms, because if you are in a plane and you're shooting down, you're going to have an awful time if your viewfinder is essentially through the top. With this one, it's very easy to use looking down like this. Obviously, you are going to be shooting at the side. It's very unlikely you're going to get a good shot forwards unless you're in a very steep dive. Another thing that I did with this, and I am aware of how ridiculous this looks, but flip it over and obviously keep track of where your shutter button is because it's on the other side, and you can use your camera like this, facing down. A good thing about the settings when you are up in a light aircraft is that it's very unlikely that you're going to be metering the whole time or changing your focus at all. So what I do is I get up Obviously, maybe we go through the clouds or climb up to kind of the altitude we're going to spend the flight at, and I'll take one reading. Invariably, it's going to say 16 or 17. And if you don't know about the metered prisms on the Hasselblads, that's an EV number that corresponds to one of these orange EV sort of dials on the edge of your thing. So all you want to do is you slide your aperture and shutter ring until you get to 16, press in the thing that combines them and go all the way to your maximum shutter speed. This only goes up to 500, and if you can go faster, I'd say maybe 1,000 or 1/2000th of a second are more appropriate. It's funny saying that this isn't appropriate though, because it does a really good job. Hopefully you like some of the pictures I'm about to share. And a little fun tidbit for you camera nerds. The Hasselblad cameras were actually originally conceived for aerial photography. I think that Victor Hasselblad actually based his original design off of I think it was a German aircraft camera that somehow fell into his hands and he was asked to replicate for the Swedish military. But yeah, that's all about settings. There are a few things about the cockpit of the aircraft that might not go as expected. For example, one, it's not glass, it's actually sort of toughened plastic perspex kind of thing. But it's very important that you don't shoot through a polarizer. I know some people like to use polarizers for every shot, but you can't really do that because the coating on the aircraft plastic is actually polarized in its own way. Obviously, it can get pretty bright when you're up above the clouds. So if you shoot a polarizer through a polarizer, high school physics, you know that you're going to get some weird shapes. You get that kind of pearlescent, almost Newton rings look to your viewfinder. If you've got one, take it off. You might see in a couple of the clips that I shot from the plane that the variable neutral density filter in the video camera was actually interacting with that. It's one of those things that you might not expect, so now you know and you can avoid it. Another thing is that obviously when you are above the clouds, it's really bright. You want to take a lens hood because, especially with a long lens, there's a lot of stray light, there's a lot of reflective surfaces, and the fact that you're sort of up above the clouds means that you're not really going to be shaded by anything, but take a lens hood. You can use your hand in a pinch. Some people talk about these rubber lens hoods that obviously you just buy them, so this would be a Bay 60 rubber lens hood. And I heard people say that you can kind of cup them against the glass. So if you imagine that my notepad here is the plane window, you kind of get this kind of effect going to lessen some of the glare. I think that's a really bad idea, and the reason for that is that the entire airframe is vibrating with the propeller. So if you do that, you're essentially connecting your camera via the lens hood, the vibrations that go on in the cockpit. A much better idea is to use your upper body and arms as more of a gimbal. You can imagine I'm sat in the seat and obviously the plane's shaking around, but if I hold it as stable as I can in my hands and I'm using sort of this motion to dampen out the plane, I'm going to get more stable shots. Maybe I get slightly more detail in the negatives. 6x6 is great because you don't really care about the camera orientation when you're shooting like this. I can imagine that it might be awkward. I have actually taken a Pentax 6.7 up in a plane, but when you have to do the changes in orientation, you find yourself wanting to sort of put your elbow out. Obviously, you don't want to touch the pilot. You don't really want to touch the window, so you kind of find yourself up like this. But with the Hasselblad, you're just doing up and down, left to right. You don't really have to do that kind of thing too much, unless you go for the fancy overhand grip and you find yourself shooting like this. Also bear in mind that the pilot in the aircraft will be able to hear and speak to you through the headsets. So if you see something that you want to do a second pass of, or if you're sort of curious about maybe having the pilot dip a wing if you're in one of the aircraft that has the lower wings, or raise the wing if you're in one of the aircraft that has the higher wings. You know what I mean? I've explained it badly, but some planes are a wing with a body underneath, and then some of the wing with the plane on top. Talk to the pilot and they'll know sort of if they can go lower, if they can go at a different angle. I was fortunate enough to have my brother looking for hours. So because he was looking for an instrument rating, he just wanted to fly. He didn't have an A to B. We were landing at the same airport that we took off from. So it wasn't like there was sort of delays to the route. We were really just flying so that he could get the correct amount of hours to progress with his license. And that was really beneficial. It did mean that I could be a little bit more pushy. Maybe if you're not too familiar with a pilot, you can't ask him to do something again or to do something a bit slower. Actually slower. There's a good point to this as well. If you go slower in a plane, it gets bumpier. So sometimes you might think, wow, this is Beachy Head. This is a great bit of landscape. I want to photograph it. Could you go slower so that I can take more photos? That actually ends up being worse than doing a flyby at a more stable speed, because when they get closer to their stall speed, I'm not a pilot, I don't know the physics of it, but essentially the slower the plane goes, the more turbulence affects it. So if you think that going slower gives you more chance and less motion blur, you might be wrong about that. Another thing you might want to note is the film speed you use. I settled on 400 because there's a trade-off in my head of grain and versatility, and I always suggest going on versatility. If you are told the weather's great tomorrow, we're going for a flight, and you're very confident about that, you could choose a lower speed film. But given that it may be cloudy or your conditions could change on the morning, you don't want to be stuck with preloaded backs all of the wrong speed. 400 is good because a little bit of grain is a fine trade-off for a film that you can shoot in any conditions. And it's going to be one of those things where just because the vibration and the fact that you're moving, there's not going to be sort of tripod sharp situations at all. So if you're there thinking about using your slides or using much sort of finer grained film, you're already kind of like moving away from that perfectionist fine detail aspect. So I feel that using something a bit faster, a little bit more forgiving is worth the time. I shot mainly color negative. I think a lot of them are Portra 400s, a couple of rolls of 400H, and then a couple of rolls of HP5. So all negative film. I would love to shoot slides over a kind of, maybe like a sunset going around the coast, but the cost of slides and the inherent inaccuracy in the aerial photography does make me a bit scared. Maybe if I start self-developing E6, then I might shoot a roll of Provia, but that's obviously for the future. So the kit that I used for most of the pictures you're going to see is this Hasselblad 500 series. The 120mm makro-planar, despite being a macro lens, I found was a fantastic aerial photography lens. The 80mm is a little bit too wide, and I found that with the 50mm, you're quite often taking pictures that include aspects of the plane. I took a few with the 50, but it always became a case of cropping the wing out of the bottom of the shot, or taking quite a small crop, maybe like a 4x3 of like the top left, because of how much of the aircraft was actually in it. I also found with the 50 that it's very common to get flare and different sort of image defects because of the curved perspex. If you think about the plane cockpit having a curve to it, and again, if I just demonstrate with this piece of paper, if you're shooting at the top of the curve, you're actually shooting through thicker glass or plastic than if you shoot through at the bottom. It goes straight through at 90 degrees, and that can give gradient effects or various sort of image defects that you might want to avoid. The 120 is great because it's a short telly. I think if we put it into 35mm terms, we could call this like a kind of 65, 70mm. Someone's probably going to correct me in the comments, but it gives you the reach without going into sort of camera shake, and obviously because it's an SLR, if you do have it up to your eyes with the 180mm, things are going to be whipping past. It's not going to be quite as easy to get a nice framing off. The lens itself, I mean, if you're shooting something at f11, it's not really going to be about depth of field, and the fact that you're racked all the way to infinity, this lens actually quite usefully has a hard stop. So I mean, it's not really about the lens itself, it's more about the focal length. I mean, you could use like some $15 Tamron adapt tool thing. It'll give you similar results given the conditions you use it in. But yeah, this performed great, and it's a sort of as big a negative as you can get out of as small an SLR package. Don't worry too much about kit. I feel I'm overstressing that. I like shooting medium format from the aircraft because I'm not going to be taking that many shots, and just the fact that I get the big square negative means that it is a bit hectic. I might be a bit sloppy with composition, but I can clean it up with a 4x3 crop, and you'll see in a lot of these pictures that that's exactly what I've done. Let's jump into some images, because I feel like if I've talked for 3 or 4 minutes about, oh, this is how I do it, this is best practice, and then show loads of really blurry, wonky images, maybe I'm less trustworthy. So I hope that you like what I've got, and let's cut to that now. So here's a shot of Town Headlands. Now this is the little peninsula that comes out, it's very close to Newquay. I was taking off from Newquay Airport, so this is obviously pretty close to the start of the flight. Now let's punch in a bit. You can see the detail in the guys in the water, just in the foreground. Obviously this is a crop from a 6x6, but I like this one. I like how it's that sort of aerial perspective means you can see the top of it, not just one of the sides. Now I mainly cropped the top, I think, but you can see there's that wispy bit of cloud. Maybe that boat to the right adds a bit of interest to the back of the frame. This next shot is of Fistral, which is another famous beach in North Cornwall. I like how, despite there being probably about 100 cars in that car park, they're all either black, red or white, apart from one blue car. Bonus points if you can spot that. It's fun to have the perspective where you come down at 45 degrees and it's almost like the perspective is exaggerated in the foreground, where it's almost like you're looking straight down, but then as you go out into the frame and further out to sea, it kind of looks more like you're looking down on it. This actually might have been with the 80mm lens. It does seem a bit wider than the previous shot. So here's an aerial shot of Polzeath, which is unbelievably busy. Look at just the amount of people with their windbreakers and their tents set up, and the full car park to the right in the foreground. This is obviously a really busy beach. Yeah, this shot back on the 120 gives you that kind of new perspective on quite a popular and well-traveled place. Let me punch in. Let's have a look at the little figures in the. Yeah, you can see these guys on the beach. It's not the most detailed shot, but then plain glass, not much you can do. If anything, I wish I could have been a little bit lower down to shoot more of the foreground and less of the sky. But obviously, light aircraft, limited to 500 feet, so there's not much wiggle room there. So obviously we've been looking at color images, but here's one in black and white. Now this is kind of teetering on the edge of being a failed image. There is actually a lighthouse on that small peninsula. You can just see the foot of it, kind of dead center. If it had poked out, I feel it would have really kind of grounded this shot. But I like how you get these tendrils of cloud kind of flowing off the land over the sea. And obviously that one rock you can see off the peninsula gives it that kind of, I don't know, cloud blanketed, foggy mystery scene. And I quite like this. Just, yeah, shame about the lighthouse. And this shot is Beachy Head, so south coast of England. This is actually shot on 35mm before I switched to using the Hasselblad. When I first started, I thought more frames and sort of easier form factor would make the 35mm the better choice. But you can see from this shot, it doesn't quite have the resolution. This was taken with a 35mm lens, so obviously there is a bit of a crop to get the subject even recognizable. It didn't work so well, and I wish that at some point I can go back and kind of try this again with the Hasselblad. 35mm on 35mm focal length on 35mm film really doesn't let you get that good an enlargement of anything that's small when you're in the air. Obviously, if I was a lot closer, this could have worked, but the problem with the parallax in flight is that the closer you are to something, the faster it appears to move, meaning that were I close enough to the ground to get this shot, I would have had like a fraction of a second and it wouldn't really work. I don't know. It just seems that through my experience and what I've kind of gone through, around 120mm on 6x6 seems to be a real sweet spot for aerial photography. So this about wraps up the video. I hope that you enjoyed some of the aerial shots, and I know this is a bit niche, but if you do try it, now you kind of know what's up. Hopefully this helps 15 people. I noticed recently that I've got over 10,000 subscribers to the YouTube channel, which is fantastic. I mean, that's sort of a huge milestone. Obviously it occurred during a bit of a lull on the channel. I wasn't kind of peaking at it every day, so it was a nice surprise to come back to. I struggled a bit with motivation to go out and sort of shoot these videos during lockdown, but I would like to kind of redouble my efforts, and I'd like to just at the end of the video give a little pitch for you guys. What would you like videos on? I can do videos on the film, I can do videos on the equipment. I was thinking about doing a video about just my struggle with photographic motivation, because I think it is something that affects different people at different times in their kind of photographic journeys. So if you think that I could maybe, I mean, I don't know what I'd say. I think I'd have to sort of do the research as I made the video. But if that could be interesting, then drop a comment. I'm sure I'm not the only one that struggles there. Other than that, thank you for watching. I think that's, yeah, I think that I'll try and do another one in the not too distant future, and I'm glad that you enjoyed this one if you did. That's all from me.